Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to a read-through of J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. We are going through the Fellowship of the Ring. So I did a chapter-by-chapter read-through of The Two Towers, and then I followed that with a chapter-by-chapter read-through of The Return of the King and the Appendices. And now I am wrapping around to do a chapter-by-chapter read-through of The Fellowship of the Ring, which is the first part of Lord of the Rings. I'm figuring that it doesn't make all that much of a difference, since if somebody, including me, if I were to want to make a playlist of all of these, if anyone would want to do that, they could arrange them in any way they want. So you can put this one first. In a couple of years, I will do it again. I will do it in correct order. but we have skipped the prefatory letter that is well known to Tolkien fans, and we've also skipped the prologue, which is about pipeweed, and that recapitulates the important part of The Hobbit, J.R.R. Tolkien's children's book, The Hobbit, about the finding of the ring, about Gollum, the creature Gollum, which had a magic ring that Bilbo finds in the course of The Hobbit. He takes the ring from Gollum, and the ring has the ability, once you put it on, to turn you invisible. It has other abilities that we learn as The Lord of the Rings opens, one of which is to immensely prolong life. Bilbo is decades and decades and decades older, and yet he appears not to have aged at all. He feels that he has, but he doesn't look like he has. The ring is always with him. He doesn't put it on, but he has it in his pocket all the time, and he constantly thinks about it. And in the first chapter that we saw, he decides that he's going to leave Bag End. He's going to leave Hobbiton in a grand fashion. He's going to call everybody together, all the friends and hobbits and in-laws and distant relatives, for a gigantic party, his 111st birthday. And at the conclusion of telling them all what he thinks of them, he's going to put on the ring and vanish from their sight and then leave. And he does. And thanks to the intercession of his friend, the wizard Gandalf, he leaves the ring behind. He voluntarily leaves the ring behind. It and Bag End, his house and all of his treasure and everything that he owns, he is leaving to his cousin Frodo. And Frodo and Gandalf speak briefly about that. Gandalf tells him that he is now the master of Bag End, and that all of this is his, and that he should not use the ring. Leave it on the mantelpiece as an heirloom. That's all. Gandalf confesses to Frodo that he is a little bit concerned, and that he's not even sure how to name his concerns. But that he has things to do. He has places to go. He's not even going to stick around for the end of pleasantries. He takes off, and we learn that he's gone for a long, long, long time, decades. He's gone for a long time, while Frodo just gets older, settles into his way at Bag End. Turns out he's just as eccentric as Bilbo was, just as much a cause for head shaking among the proper hobbits of the Shire. He has many guests. He inquires after strangers. He seems to have non-hobbit instincts when it comes to things like that. But things go on as they are. He has a groundskeeper, Sam Gamgee, who tends to his garden and whatnot, and he has young friends among the descendants of the old Took, specifically two young hobbits named Merry and Pippin. But all looks completely normal, with a slight change in the surrounding atmosphere. More and more strangers seem to be passing by the Shire. Elves seem to be passing through the woods on their way west, in greater numbers than before. And the dwarves who regularly use the main road nearby, they talk with hobbits a bit in their rough way. And through these sources and others, the hobbits start to become aware of greater and greater mentions of old fairy tales of theirs. The evil at the end of an old story, as Tolkien puts it. The Dark Lord in Mordor. More and more of those things start to come up, but they don't mean anything. In the Shire, it's business as usual. It's sunny days or downpours. It's good crops or bad. It's people gossiping, as they do in these chapters about someone saw a giant tree beast wandering around in the forest or whatnot. Nothing comes of it. And Frodo doesn't think anything of it, although we're told that he is getting a little more restless as time passes, starting to feel an urge to strike out and try to find Bilbo. He has no idea where Bilbo is or anything about what's happening in the outside world to his old friend, his benefactor. And then, after a long, long time, Gandalf does return. And that is the chapter that we get today. This is the chapter, The Shadows of the Past. And this is chapter 2, and we get a ton of exposition here. Gandalf delivers a ton of exposition. He shows up in the evening at Bag End. And we get the next morning. The action opens the next morning. We are told that he and Frodo talked that night. Then Frodo goes to bed. And the next day, in sunlight, Gandalf has told him the night before, some of the things I have to say to you, some of the tidings are dark enough so that better to talk about them in the sunlight. And so they wait. We don't get that first part of the conversation. We get the second part. We get the follow-up the next day. When Frodo and Gandalf are having breakfast, the window is open, the birds are chirping, the spring sunshine is falling on Frodo's ornate garden. We can hear Sam Gamgee's clippers out in the garden as Frodo urges Gandalf to tell him more of what he started to say about this ring. And that's where we get a huge bulk of the story. This is where, for the first time, Lord of the Rings sets out its epic agenda. We're still not dealing with an epic. We're still in a private sitting room next to a lovely English garden. But here we are told what's at stake. Gandalf tells Frodo the bare outline of the One Ring, that it was forged by the Dark Lord Sauron, that it was forged by him specifically to control and blight the works of the other great rings. We're told that there were rings for mortal men, all of which have been reclaimed and doled out by the Dark Lord to his worst servants, the Ringwraiths, the Nazgul. We're told that the dwarves had 7 rings, and that all of them that could be recovered have been recovered by the Dark Lord, and the ones that haven't been were consumed by dragon fire. Dragons like to build hoards of treasure, and those rings would often end up in those hoards of treasure, and the dragons would just use their flame to destroy those rings. We're told that there were 3 great rings that are the possession of the Elven kings, and that they were never touched by Sauron, and they are not possessed by him, and he doesn't know where they are. And we're also told that he doesn't know where his own ring is. The One Ring. The ring that he made in order to control all the others. We're told that he doesn't know where it is, and that for a long, long time he thought it was destroyed. It was hacked from his finger during the last alliance of elves and men an eon ago, and lost. A human named Isildur took it for himself, and it betrayed him, slipped off his finger, and he was shot to death by orcs, and the ring was lost. Fell into the silt of the River Anduin and was just lost to some eddy or black pool, and not seen again for centuries upon centuries upon centuries, as the Dark Lord was drastically diminished in strength. He poured a huge amount of his power into that ring, and without it, he was drastically defeated, but not eradicated. So he vanished into the hinterlands and slowly built back his strength. It's an odd detail of this chapter that Gandalf tells Frodo that the Dark Lord was of the opinion, the Dark Lord was convinced that the ring was destroyed. He was convinced that when Isildur took the ring, the elves and the humans at the battlefield on the slopes of Mount Doom destroyed the ring, as Gandalf points out they should have. Gandalf tells Frodo that Sauron is under the impression that that did happen, until he learns otherwise, until he learns that the ring has been found and where it's been found, and the name Baggins, the name of the Shire. I've always had my problems with that little note. We can blast right over it. We don't have to spend much time on it, but it seems to me from the rest of what we learn about this book that Sauron would have known if his ring had been destroyed. If the ring had been destroyed, he would have lost the power to build Barad-dûr, to build Mordor. He would have lost the power, a huge chunk of power, to cause the evil that he causes. When the ring actually is destroyed at the end of this book, it brings about the immediate downfall of Sauron. It turns out that that power, even though it was distant from Sauron, was still an edifice on which a lot of his evil was built. When that power is destroyed, that evil goes away. It doesn't have a foundation anymore. It doesn't seem likely to me that Sauron would have thought the ring was destroyed. And also, I have no idea how Gandalf would know that. Anyway, why he would think that in any case. But Gandalf tells the story of the One Ring that was lost and is now found. That somehow or other, a being named Smeagol found a being named Smeagol took that ring from a little creature that found it, and became Gollum over the course of many, many, many years, where he lived in darkness at the roots of the mountain and gnawed on bones, and hated the sun and hated the moonlight and hated the ring and hated himself, but couldn't let go of it, and it prolonged his life. We're told that story, Gollum's story, and we're told the story of the ring. And Frodo listens with growing disgust. He's just appalled at this. That so many questions come to his mind. How long have you known this? Did you know that this ring was supremely dangerous, the most dangerous thing in all of Middle-earth? And how long have you known it? And why was Gollum allowed to live? Why are you telling me that you've looked for him long and hard? That your friend Aragorn, who is mentioned in this chapter for the first time, looked for him and actually found him? Why wasn't he killed? He's as evil as any orc. We get Gandalf trying to alleviate that, trying to palliate that, saying, it's not your place to deal out death. Also saying, I have a feeling that he has a role to play yet in this whole story. If you saw him, you wouldn't want his death. He's a sad and pathetic figure. And in the course of this discussion, we get our first real understanding of Frodo. It's not a patch on what's coming. We're going to learn a lot more about Frodo, but we get a first sense of what he's like, and that he is, in some ways, very different from Bilbo. He says that he's not made for great adventures. And at one point, once he learns all of this about the ring, he offers it to Gandalf. He says, I am not made for perilous quests, and offers, but I have so little of any of these things. You are wise and powerful. Will you not take the ring? And Gandalf has a surprisingly dramatic reaction. He says, no, cried Gandalf, springing to his feet. With that power, I should have power too great and terrible. Over me the ring would gain a power still greater and more deadly. His eyes flashed, and his face was lit as by a fire within. Do not tempt me, for I do not wish to become like the Dark Lord himself. Yet the way of the ring to my heart is by pity, pity for the weakness and desire for the strength to do good. Do not tempt me. I dare not take it, not even to keep it safe, unused. The wish to wield it would be too great for my strength. I shall have much need of it. Great peril lies before me. To put it mildly, that has never really convinced me. I know it's supposed to convince, and the more we learn a lot in the course of the whole book. We learn that Gandalf is not even remotely human. He has a human form, but he's an immortal being, an angel, a god, in human form. He's limited by that human form, but not much. And we also learn that he himself is the bearer of one of those three elven rings. That was one of those three great rings of power was given to an elf named Círdan in the Havens, not actually all that far from Hobbiton, and that Círdan gives it to Gandalf. So Gandalf is carrying one of the three great elven rings. And there, I think that's what he means here when he says that this ring would give me access to an even greater power. I've never been all that convinced by it. Yes, the one ring corrupts, and sooner or later everyone who uses it falls under the sway of the shadow. Yes, it's true. But Bilbo used it a lot and lived for a century without falling into the shadow. Now, Gandalf says, you can live for centuries and never know all there is to know about hobbits. They are remarkably durable, and they will not succumb under supernatural threats that would wear down the wise in far shorter a time. But not immediately. Not immediately. Frodo also uses the ring. Sam Gamgee is going to use the ring. Yes, they're all hobbits, but hobbits aren't Kryptonians. I think Gandalf is selling himself short. I honestly do. I think that he wouldn't have to use the ring, wouldn't have to put it on, but I think Gandalf with the ring on a chain around his neck would have kept it a lot safer. We're going to be getting into this plan. When we get to the great chapter of the Council of Elrond, we'll delve more into this plan, if you want to call it a plan. But I have greater faith in the character of Gandalf than either Gandalf or, I guess, Tolkien did, because I don't believe that he would fall into the shadow immediately if he had this thing. I don't believe he'd pop it on and start saying, well, let's do this and then this and this. If he knew perfectly well that to wear it would announce himself to Sauron, then he wouldn't wear it. Well, if he didn't wear it, I trust that he would last a long time before it completely subsumed his will. But in this chapter, we get the incredibly dramatic reveal of what the ring is. It's a wonderful page that I want to show you here. Because this is, like I said, this chapter is the first hint we have of the epic doings to come. They're not going to be here for a while. We're going to have a lot of Hobbit stuff. But we get this. We get the script that is on the ring. The ring seems to be made of plain gold and completely unadorned. Gandalf has to throw it into the fire. And Bilbo's worried. It's already got a hold on him. His is precious. He doesn't want it to be harmed, but it isn't harmed in any way. It isn't even warmed. But the fire brings out letters. And the letters are in Elvish, but they are the script. They are the speech of Mordor. And they are the most famous lines in this book. The equivalent of the litany against fear from Doom. They are. I will read them to you. You already know them. Set three rings for the elven kings under the sky. 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone. 9 for mortal men doomed to die. 1 for the dark lord on his dark throne. In the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all. 1 ring to find them. 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. In the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. So this, in the nature of all comic book supervillains, this is a supervillain announcing that he is a supervillain. He is putting that on the ring. He's writing it on the ring. And once that is known, all of Gandalf's surmises are put to bed. He's now knows beyond a shadow of a doubt what he's dealing with. Frodo looks at that lettering and says, I can't read it. And Gandalf says, well, I can. And this is what it says. But he tells Frodo that he didn't really have many doubts before that. He's been thinking about this a long time. As we talked about last time, he's been thinking about this an enormously long time. An enormously long time. This ring makes its bearer invisible. Gandalf seems to know in this chapter that the ring made Isildur invisible. Because he tells Frodo that when the ring slips from Isildur's finger, the orcs who are pursuing him are able to see him, implying they couldn't see him when it was on his finger. So Gandalf knows that the ring makes its bearer invisible, except for Sauron. It doesn't make Sauron invisible, but it makes other bearers invisible. Gandalf knows that, and he knows that this ring does that. And he knows also that great rings, rings of power, prolong the life of their bearer, and this ring definitely does that. So again, as I said last time, why he doesn't put 2 and 2 together decades earlier than this, even as a hypothesis, I do not know. I have no idea. Maybe it's just that he was growing complacent, or maybe another possibility, one that one of you raised in an email. He has been in the White Council, the Council of the Wise, all of this time. All the time that when he's not in Hobbiton or somewhere else, he's conferring with the other members of the Wise, whether Círdan happens to come from the Havens, or Galadriel, or Erestor, or Celeborn, or Elrond, and also the head of the council, Saruman, the wizard, the head of his order, as Gandalf refers to him, who we are told, and we learn later on, has an incredible power of persuasion, almost a supernatural power of persuasion. And Saruman has been telling the council all along that this idea that the ring will ever be refound is nonsense, that it's long since rolled down the Anduin into the sea, that it will never be recovered, and that any indication that you have to the contrary, any other little trinkets or hints that you have, you're construing wrong. So it could be that one of the reasons Gandalf waits so long is that every time he goes to the one place he goes that he expects guidance on the matter, he is told to do nothing. It could be that Gandalf the Grey is susceptible to the voice of Saruman. Perfectly good explanation, better than most that I've heard. Either way, whatever the reason is, now Gandalf knows for sure. We learn later on, we learn in later parts of The Lord of the Rings, that he studied the records in Gondor, including a parchment written by Isildur. where he says that this ring is precious to him. He uses that word. And Gandalf tells us then, this is hundreds of pages from where we are now, that then all his doubts were gone. He's only come back here because he knows, not because he's trying to find out. He's a little bit diffident on that point to Frodo in this chapter, but he knows that this is the One Ring. I might add here, of course, I love Lord of the Rings, and I love it more than Peter Jackson's great trilogy, even though I acknowledge how great that trilogy is. But every once in a while, in the course of Peter Jackson's trilogy, I think he actually adds something that's good. He adds a twist or a fillip that's good. And there's this, in the movie of the Fellowship of the Ring, this moment is really well done. And there is a little moment in this scene that isn't in the book that I think is terrific. I think it's terrifically well done. Where Gandalf gives the ring, takes the ring out of the fire and hands it to Frodo, who notices that it's cool, that it's not burned at all. And Gandalf asks him, well, look at it. Do you see any writing on it? Can you read anything on it? And he turns away because Frodo says no. And the camera is in a close-up on Ian McKellen's face when suddenly Frodo says, oh, wait, there is writing. And Gandalf just closes his eyes. And that fraction of a second is the absolute last extinguishing of Gandalf's hope that this is not the One Ring. That the great tragedy and end of this age is not sitting there on Frodo's kitchen table. In the book, all of Gandalf's doubts are gone by this point. He already knows what he's found. In the movie, there's a tiny shred of hope that waits just that long. Just that long. And is wonderfully dramatically portrayed, where, oh wait, there are letters. And Frodo says, I can't read them, and unlike in the book, Gandalf doesn't say, I can, he says, there are few who can. And the only thing that's left in this chapter is a little bit of fun. Because Gandalf and Frodo are talking about all this. Frodo gets a little bit angry with Gandalf. How long have you known all this? What on earth? What have you been doing? Why you've known this? You've suspected it, and you've done nothing. You've allowed Gollum to live. All of these things. Frodo is angry, but he's also desperate. He calls Gandalf my oldest, best trusted friend. What can I do? And as they're discussing this, two things happen that are wonderful. Two great fun moments crop up. One is that very, very pointedly, Gandalf does not tell Frodo what he should do. He waits for Frodo to tell him, which is, well, this thing is a danger to everyone. I must leave the Shire. I don't know where to, I don't know what to do, but I must leave. I don't want to endanger the Shire. Now that I know that the Dark Lord in Mordor knows about the Shire, his emissaries could be on their way here right now. I have to leave. Frodo makes a purely selfless and heroic decision without Gandalf laying it out for him on a map. That's one thing. And the other thing is that the two of them notice that Sam Gamgee's clippers have been silent for quite some time, and Gandalf realizes that he's been eavesdropping and grabs him through the window and admonishes him. And Sam is begging for forgiveness. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. At first, he temporizes hilariously because Gandalf accuses him of eavesdropping, and Sam says, "Well, Mr. Frodo's house doesn't have eaves, and that's a fact." But eventually, he profusely apologizes, and Gandalf comes up with a perfect penance. Since you're really sorry for what you've overheard, your penance is that you will go with Frodo. He's leaving with barely the shirt on his back. You're going with him as his companion. And that's how this chapter ends. Really, I have my questions, I have my issues with some of the underpinning of it, but this chapter really shows what the prologue does not show, which is that when Tolkien wants to, he is, I would argue, the best dispenser of exposition in English language fiction. There are some secondary people. There are some close runners-up, but I think he's the best, and this chapter shows that. It's true that it's not a patch on the absolute apotheosis of infodumps, which is the chapter called The Council of Elrond, but still, This shows how good a job he can do when he wants to. It is a remarkably human, affecting, dramatically unified chapter that also dumps a gigantic amount of information that you need for the book. Artfully. It's well done. Even the dramatic gesture of not giving us the first part of the conversation in the evening. Tolkien doesn't give us that. How many fantasy authors would have the confidence to leave that out? Not many, I would assume. I would argue not many now or then. So this is chapter 2, and now we've got ourselves a plot. Now we've got ourselves more than just a setting, more than a premise, and more than exposition. We've got a plot, which is that our hero has to leave town. Frodo has to go on a journey. So that's where we will pick up next time in this read-along of The Fellowship of the Ring. I will see you then. Thank you, Book 2.